My location is this little country of Georgia in between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. To get a successful civilization going, we have to more or less get every single point on this checklist here. Number 1. How will you feed your people? Well, first things first, can we have animals and crops? Using more data today, we can see that the country is more or less split between pasture land and cropland. Heading over to the FBI World Factbook, we can see that the country of Georgia's coastal climate allows for important tea and citrus growth. Because living off tea and citrus fruits are hard, it's probably a good idea to get some other form of food. Because of our proximity to Mesopotamia, it's a good bet that we can more or less copy what they're doing. And if the African Tribes Project taught me anything, it's that you can more or less live off cows. So the question is, do they have cows? But seriously though, they actually had cows. And a few other animals that aren't too important at the moment. And if you're that kind of health person, they also had wheat, barley, and some peas, which theoretically covers the whole food pyramid. The fact that they call it a food pyramid and not a food triangle makes it believe that there are 3 other sides that we don't know about. But Kyle, you're just listing stuff Mesopotamia has, not stuff we have. Good point, Stock Photo Classroom, and that leads me to my next point. Number 2. How will you trade with other peoples? I mentioned earlier how we were connected to the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, but what I didn't mention was that the Black Sea is actually connected to the Mediterranean Sea, which, if you're a history buff, you would know that the Mediterranean Sea was used for a crap ton of trade back then. Specifically Mesopotamia, where they traded a crap ton during the Copper Age, which lucky for us is exactly where we start out. I also want to mention that on the FBI Factbook, it also mentioned Georgia as having lumber as a resource. Number 3. What resources will be at your disposal? I've already mentioned tea, fruit, and lumber, but there's also pretty good sources of iron and copper. We can sail over to Rwanda for some tin. But Kyle, why do you need tin? Well, if we're going to last as long as possible, we're going to need to last through the copper, bronze, and iron ages. We already have iron and copper down, but what we really need is bronze. Any self-respecting metal alloy lover would know that bronze is an alloy of tin and copper, so we already have the copper, we just need the tin. Number 4. How will you protect your people from invaders, disease, and the climate? All you Trump fans get ready, because we're going to build a wall. Okay, but I'm actually serious about this. China did it, so, I mean, you can. Doing some extreme math, it would take around 55 years to build a wall around Georgia. It may seem really impractical, but hear me out on this. The first practical use you could use with it is just to, simply keep out invaders. But what if, to defend from the plague, we take all the sick people and boot them over the wall? I mean, you could also technically use it to banish people easily. Rome actually did it as an excuse to not use the death penalty. We don't really need to worry about climate because, according to the FBI, it's warm and pleasant. Number 5. How will you build shelter? As mentioned before, we have a pretty decent amount of wood to build houses with. But the one downside to wood is how flammable it is. So, if you want to copy Mesopotamia a bit more, you can use sun-dried clay bricks. Taking this housing thing one step further, it's probably a good idea to regulate the size of bricks, the length of streets, the size of houses, etc., etc. I mean, Rome did it, so it's probably a good idea to bandwagon. Number 6. How will you control your people? I actually think controlling people would be pretty easy if you used religion. What if there was one all-powerful God that would cast plague onto everyone that disobeys him? What if there was a new task every day that they had to fill that would fit the government's needs? I mean, it'd be a pretty easy way to, control the masses. But there's still the issue of corruption in the government. My proposal to stop this is to use the Mandate of Heaven, which Chinese dynasties used. The Mandate of Heaven was pretty much the Chinese anti-corruption policy that pretty much said that whenever a ruler was corrupt, the gods would release natural disasters upon them, which would initiate the people of the city to revolt and go against them. Because Georgia's prone to earthquakes, it's probably not a good idea to link the mandate of heaven to natural disasters because of how random they are. Instead, I think it'd be a good idea to link it to the general prosperity of the civilization. Like, if someone does something incredibly dumb, like start an unnecessary war or leak season 2 of Stranger Things, then the people would have full right to revolt. These revolutions would also be a good time to change up the government from, say, a democracy to a dictatorship, depending on whatever crisis is going on. Number 7. How will you explain the natural world around you? Our explanation of the natural world around us would be kind of like Taoism, where it's like, oh yeah, that happens, go with the flow. Number 8. What technologies will you use? I already mentioned how we had copper, bronze, and iron to make tools with. You can make tools such as axes, knives, and spears. We still have to wait till about 2000 BCE before we can get a wheel to use technologies. But we can still use bows because we've actually found that they were used in the prehistoric times. With all these aside, we're pretty set for combat. In conclusion, I choose the country of Georgia because it has pretty much every resource you need to start a civilization. Like, comment, subscribe.